Hi, welcome to the Canadian City and Southern Model Railroad. Today's video is about rebuilding my turntable and the area around it. These are the plans for the A-frame of the turntable. I've drawn two sets because I'm making two turntables. One for this location and one for the other end of the layout. The A-frames were the only plans I really needed. The rest was pretty much just build it. Everything is all wired up underneath now. Up in here is where the frog juicer used to sit, on a little piece that folded down. It had some other controls on it as well for the turntable, but they're not going to be needed anymore, so I've moved the dual frog juicer down here. Its input wires from the main bus, its output wires to the wipers on the turntable. This is the control wire to the stepper motor from the controller. All these wires are color coded so I know what they do. This is the loco net. This is the main power bus where it plugs into the next module. These are all the light wires. All these orange and red and yellow wires are the wires to all the various controls and switch machines. I made this little bracket to hold the controller because I might change that later on. But after moving the dual frog juicer underneath, there was barely room to go ahead and mount the controller in the fascia. So if I ever change anything, I will simply make the little panel to control the turntable area fit that space. All of the little bit of foam work around the edges of the board that holds the new turntable has been filled in. And I've recarved the cliffs over in here. And they're now ready for their plaster paint coat. I haven't done any more work on the turntable itself yet because I want to finish up all the plaster work and mess and grass and ballast and that kind of stuff so that none of the tools knock into the superstructure of the turntable. And since I'm now sitting on my workbench, not on the layout itself, this area will be easy to reach and I can finish the turntable just like it was sitting on the workbench. When I was working on the bench, all these rails were dressed on the ends to make it easy to get rail joiners on there in case there was room to extend those sidings a little bit, because they barely fit my smaller locomotives. So I have done that and the cork is down. The glue will be dry and I can pull out all these pins and put the last few ties and put a few little extensions to the rails and spike that down. And then I'll have enough room for my larger locomotives and for my friends who might have a K27 who ever come and run on it. Some 12-foot long 2x12s have been glued to the top of the ties to make walkways. Also some 2x12s 6-foot long on the ends and in the middle, and 3 little 2x6 6-foot long to make the walkways across. The A-frame is ready to go on next. It's had its truss rods and nut bolt washer castings added. The rocks have been blended in and a little bit of grass has been put down. 2 ties were glued to these 3 ties here to lengthen this siding just a tiny little bit. There'll be a shed over it. The rails to lengthen these 2 sidings and the stops will come next. The extensions have been put on the two sidings, and they're now barely long enough to fit my K27. Also, the turntable is just barely long enough. It's 62 feet. The turntable has to be turned by hand because I'm over on the workbench. I've got jumpers to the rails, but the power to the turntable isn't long enough to reach over to the workbench. My turntable is freelance, but it is roughly based on the Laws turntable in Laws, California. On that turntable, there's two large posts, only about 3 feet tall, that suspend guy wires to the outsides of the main beams. Now, I'm not sure if there's clearance to do it that way on my new turntable for the larger locomotive. So I may just put the center guy rods in, truss rods in, and leave out the inside ones. Since my turntable is slightly lighter and smaller than the prototype that I'm kind of loosely basing it on. I'm running the engine out of the way so I can get into the area to ballast. To spread my ballast, I'm using a small Dixie cup. And I'm going to put this ballast down very lightly. I don't want to overdo it because later on I'll come back with fine powdered dirt, and also, because this is close to the engine house, cinders, particularly since it's here by my ash pit. Now that I've sprinkled a little on, and because the shoulder was so rough, I put down a layer of glue ahead of time, which I normally don't do. And I'm going to brush this along very lightly. I'm just letting the weight of this fine, small brush spread the ballast. I'm not putting down any pressure. And then I work the other way. This gets most of the ballast off the rails and off the top of the ties. There's a slight gap around the edge of the turntable pit. So I'm folded a piece of cardboard, thin cardboard, into a V so that I can get just a tiny little bit of ballast in that crack. This is the same technique I used when I was doing the cribbing on my bridges, and I forgot to shoot the video for that. So I thought I'd show it here. Now this will naturally fall down behind the cribbing, and a little bit of it will spill out in the gaps towards the center, just like it would on the prototype. This is all done dry before I get it wet and put down the thinned glue to hold everything in place. Now I'll go ahead and finish up all the way around the turntable with the camera out of the way. This isn't to do with the turntable, but it's still a handy little thing. Using my cup sideways between the guardrail and the points of the switch, I'm going to put a little bit of ballast ahead of time before I ballast the rest of the track, so that not so much ballast gets in the frog to be cleaned out later. And when I run the brush over this, it'll get rid of all that it does get in there. The final details have been put on. A couple stake pockets to hold the push poles. The guy wires, truss rods have been all installed. And a central post has been put in place. After doing some tests and some measurements, I've decided to go ahead and put all my truss rods to the center of the two beams on the outside. This is one of the ways it was done on prototypes. It's slightly different from the one at Laws, but if I had put the wires to the inside and the outside, I checked and the cylinders on the K27 wouldn't have cleared. The second one, which will go on the upper level at the other town, is coming along. I won't put the walkways in until the rails are permanently spiked down and measured to fit the turntable pit. This is a stepper motor that's identical to the one that's underneath my turntable. This brass tubing is the diameter of the shaft of the turntable. And it's smaller than the shaft of the motor. This is the next bigger size of tubing, and it's a slip fit for the shaft that's on the turntable. But it's just barely too small to go on the motor shaft. This is the next bigger size, and it's too loose. So what I have done is I've used some heat shrink tubing to connect the motor to the turntable, and that's worked through most of my trials. But I'm concerned that it isn't going to last. So what I have done is I've taken some of this tubing and I ground it out, filed it out inside to where it barely fit over the shaft of the motor. But then there wasn't enough metal left to thread it for a set screw. So I took a piece of this size and soldered it on so that the thickness would be enough to drill it and tap it for a 0.90 hex nut screw. And that will now fit over, and the screw will align with the flat portion of the motor. And then I'll just tighten it up with my 0.90 hex wrench. And then I'll do the same to the turntable shaft. And I'm hoping that that will hold everything in alignment and won't slip at points when the turntable wants to drag a little bit as it goes around, or with heavier locomotives or lighter locomotives or whatever. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, share, and I'll see you next time.